All right, I'll just give a couple of comments at the top of the stand-up just to talk about why we're here, and then happy to take questions. Yeah, sure. Get a little closer. Yeah. Look, COVID has taught us many, many lessons, but the impact that supply chain constraints can have on economies, particularly small economies, was one of them. In 2020, New Zealand and Singapore worked closely together to overcome some of those issues. Singapore relies on importation to meet its food needs. Currently, 90% of their food needs comes through imports. And of course, as an exporter, New Zealand also critically needs to ensure the movement of goods and services. So in 2020, we worked together. We issued a declaration where we committed ourselves to ensuring that we would not see tariffs impact the flow of essential goods and services, and that we would also work together to ensure that these products were free-flowing at our borders. That had a number of flow-on effects that were all positive and really laid a foundation for us to continue to work together on supply chain issues. And as a result, here we are now launching a working group on supply chain issues between Singapore and New Zealand. There's three particular areas of focus. One is enhancing the sharing of data between us, understanding the ecosystem in which our goods and services are moving. That's how we can better learn, how we can make improvements, and where we may be coming up against particular friction. The second area is digitisation. This is an area where Singapore excels, where we have also championed greater digitisation at the border in order to make sure our products are more free-flowing. And during COVID-19, we actually achieved paperless movement of some really critical goods and services. It's about how we can expand on that. The third area is continuing to build resilience across regional supply chain and global, and working together to promote policies and initiatives that will build greater resilience. One of the comments that the CEO of PSA here just made I thought was really telling. I asked him, what has the impact of COVID been on your operation? He said that every port is currently seeing a slowdown in operation and a loss of productivity as we see the impact of COVID on people. And that's simply put because although this is a very automated operation, globally we still rely on people to ensure the movement of our goods and services, and COVID has impacted our ports globally hard. And we've seen what that does to us as an exporting nation, what it does to costs, what it does to delays. That's why this is an opportunity for us to get ahead of any future challenges that we might experience in the movement of our goods and services. Later today, I'll also be part of witnessing an aviation agreement, which will also build on how we can work together between Singapore and New Zealand to tackle some of the challenges that we've had in the movement of our people, but look for opportunities to ensure that they are more sustainable options for us in the future. So I won't go into any more detail on that, I'll leave that for later.
Prime Minister, this is an announcement.
Yeah.
Prime Minister, this is an announcement about doing some more talking. What tangible things do we need to get out of it?
What we've already demonstrated is that by working together, we can see the free flowing movement of critical goods and services when it matters most. So New Zealand and Singapore in 2020 demonstrated that by working together we could keep our essential goods and services moving, that we could ensure we didn't have non-tariff barriers getting in the way of the movement of our goods. We want to build on that. Singapore is a logistical expert. We send 20% of our exports through these hubs. By working together, we can improve the entire supply chain resilience for New Zealand exporters.
How did COVID-19 demonstrate to you, or how vulnerable are we, and did COVID-19 demonstrate that to you when it comes to supply chain?
Every exporting nation and every trading nation is vulnerable to the impacts of anything that affects workforce, anything that affects shipping lines. So actually, every country around the world to a certain degree is vulnerable. But we have an opportunity. COVID taught us that when we work together, we can still keep those essential goods and services moving. We did that on vaccines. Not only did we do that, we actually used technological solutions to increase the paperless movement of goods and services. Let's do that for more products. It reduces down the time that it takes for our products to move and presents a real opportunity.
Can I ask for your reaction to
China has reportedly signed its security pact with the Solomon Islands overnight. How worrying is this?
We have seen this building for some time and of course have continued to reiterate with the Solomons and China our view alongside the Pacific that collectively we are ready and available to meet the security needs of our neighbours. We see no need for this agreement. We're concerned about the militarisation of the Pacific and we continue to call on the Solomons to work with the Pacific with any concerns around their security they may have.
Well, it seems like that's too late. They've already signed this agreement.
Oh, well, again, I've signed that before having the chance to engage with the Pacific Island Forum. Now, through the Pacific Island Forum, we have in the Bikitawa Declaration an agreement that as a region, we will work together first to meet our own security needs. Australia and New Zealand have demonstrated our willingness to do that. We have been present in the Solomons during their recent hostilities. Simply put, there is no need for this agreement that they have signed, and we ask and continue to ask for dialogue with the whole region, not just New Zealand.
Will this be on your relationship building on this trip, particularly with Japan?
Sorry, what was that?
Does it speak to the importance of relationship building on this trip, particularly with Japan?
It only reinforces for us a long-held view by New Zealand in our foreign policy that we must maintain strong relationships in our region. But we must maintain those strong relationships within our Pacific region. We have been a part of conversations with the Pacific Island Forum where increasingly you do see the desire of the forum for us to work collaboratively, to respond to our own needs within the region, and that is why we've called so strongly for the Pacific to be involved in the dialogue around any new security arrangements, when actually we've got the willingness and the ability to meet those needs ourselves.
And I understand there's been a briefing in Honolulu involving officials from New Zealand, Australia, Japan and the United States around the Pacific. How significant is that?
I wouldn't consider that to be unusual. Of course, you know, these are all countries that have had increasing engagement and presence in the region, be it through economic development, through humanitarian development, and so that would not be an unusual engagement. Again, we have called for all those who have an interest in our region, and there are an increasing number of players, the EU, Japan, and obviously China. There are areas where we can collaborate and work together. But we must also draw clear lines where we have areas of concern, and the militarisation of our region is a very clear line.
Will this be on your agenda with the Prime Minister of Japan tomorrow?
Oh, look, regional issues are always on the agenda, nothing new there. And of course, we often reflect developments in our region, give and share New Zealand's perspective on those developments, and seek the views of others. Derek, and then I'll come to you.
The Pacific Reset was in part trying to bring more resources into the region where we had, dropped off some of our engagement. How much of this is just China filling a vacuum that New Zealand left behind? Did we drop the ball on this?
No, and this is where again, specifically on the issue that has been raised by the Solomons, their explanation for this agreement has been that it enables China to provide security for its own citizens in the wake of recent hostility. The point that we have simply been making is through the arrangements that we have between New Zealand, Australia and the Solomons, we have been present, we have been on the ground, we've demonstrated an ongoing willingness to support the Solomons as they address some of the recent upheaval they've had. And when our security forces are there and present alongside them, we provide that security for all who are present in the Solomons. And the need simply isn't there. If there is an issue that's not being addressed, all we've asked is for dialogue within the Pacific to address that.
Have they given you any indication that they need this agreement with China to feel more secure in the region?
No, that's not been, and I'd refer you just simply to the Prime Minister's own explanation for the agreement, in which you can see a similar view.
But we also must respect their own sovereignty, surely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, ultimately, everything here is a reflection of our view of a decision that they are within their own sovereign rights to make, of course. What we're reflecting is that those same sovereign nations within the Pacific have all been party to an agreement in the Bikitawa Declaration that when it comes to our security needs, we'll work together and raise concerns together. And unfortunately, this agreement is being signed without us having the ability, as the Pacific Island Forum, to address this issue.
These are just sort of, symptomatic of sort of rising tensions with China. So does this latest move just show how urgent it is for New Zealand and New Zealand businesses to diversify away from having China as such a key market for New Zealand?
I think what's really important for New Zealand and our exporters is that we build resilience. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to sit down and ensure that they have a particular proportion of exports across each individual market. Rather, what it means is looking at where there may be potential vulnerabilities, disruption, planning for that, and as much as possible, having an expectation that should they need to pivot, they've already done additional work to ensure they have markets that enable them to do that. Now, that's for many reasons. COVID demonstrated that at any given time, your market can reduce down very, very quickly. So there's a number of reasons why building that resilience is important. Now, we as a government can help. Of course, we have a very important FTA with China that has seen the growth of our export markets there. But equally, we've recently signed up to agreements with the UK. We're working hard on an important agreement with the EU. We as a government are doing our bit to support our exporters to have that greater resilience.
And on that sustainability in aviation, sustainability in aviation that you're headed to next, how does that marry with using a private plane to move around the region?
What I would not call a New Zealand Defence Force plane private. No, from a sustainability perspective?
Yeah, for sustainability in aviation.
Well, look, if there was the opportunity for us to use biofuels within our aviation network, there would be a number of airlines and I'm sure defence forces around the world who would be grabbing those opportunities with both hands. We do need greater uptake of innovation in this area if we're to have a sustainable aviation sector in the future where those who are attracted to New Zealand for the work that we're doing on climate change can also see that they're walking the talk in the way that they come to us to have those experiences.
Prime Minister,
I may have misunderstood your question there, Amelia, but ultimately, pooling together to travel probably is no bad thing.
On a domestic issue, why did we keep MIQ past November when the advice was it wasn't needed?
Actually, the advice that we received was that it was. So what's being discussed here, as ministers back home will have reflected, is that there was internal advice that when peer-reviewed came through to Cabinet and we adopted.
Are you worried about a legal challenge, a potential legal challenge?
No, well actually this issue has already been through the courts and you've already heard Dr Bloomfield speak directly to the process that was gone through.
Prime Minister,
you mentioned before that you'd had direct conversations with the Solomons about why they thought that they were having it, that those talks were open. Have you had at a leader-to-leader level, are you having those direct conversations with China about what their intentions are?
Certainly at officials levels, we've conveyed exactly what we've said publicly, we've conveyed privately, and that's been New Zealand's approach in our relationships, that level of transparency. We have raised directly the concern that this lends itself to the potential militarisation of our region, and we have been consistent since for a number of years around any agreement that lends itself to that further activity because New Zealand stands opposed to it.
Is it not an issue though that sort of warrants picking up the phone and actually having a call at a leader-to-leader level because of the seriousness of it?
Oh, that implies that that is not an issue that we have not consistently conveyed, but regardless of whether or not
leader-to-leader level.
More generally, because it's not just obviously this is one example of what might potentially lend itself to the militarisation. Of course, keeping in mind parties have rejected that. We have consistently conveyed our view on where we can collaboratively work together to meet needs within the Pacific and alternatively where we have concerns around potential collaboration in the
You
Pacific.
often talk about the sort of candid and informal relationships you have. You mentioned that with Prime Minister Lee. Is it not a relationship with China that you can have those frank conversations and that you can pick up the phone?
No. Look, let's be really practical here. There are some leaders where you simply don't drop a WhatsApp to. I would consider President Xi and President Biden to be amongst those.
But an official call at a leader-to-leader level on this issue.
And again, at the time that we have those bilateral engagements, when they are timed, then that is the time I'll do that. In the meantime, we have officials level who certainly convey the views of mine and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. But again, Joe, just to be clear, this is a current example. We even this agreement have raised concerns, and I think I've even answered questions from you on this over many years around such concerns. So that view will not be new.
Prime Minister, would New Zealand be
I'll finish here.
this concerned about the Solomons arrangement if it was of the US rather than China? Would we be talking about the militarisation of the Pacific then?
Yeah, from New Zealand's perspective, of course, you look at the history in the Pacific. There's a long-standing perspective as a region around what our expectation is around how we meet our security needs together. And the point you'll hear us raising is that we actually want that dialogue from the Pacific to happen collectively. And so that is what we've been calling for us to be able to have the dialogue as Pacific Island leaders and members around how we meet our needs. But actually, if we were discussing the further escalation and militarisation of our region, regardless, that is something that I actually think would require all leaders to take a perspective on.
And sorry, Prime Minister, just two more from home. How worried are you about the CPI release tomorrow? Do you think we're going to see some pretty big numbers?
Look, unfortunately, we do know that we are in a particular point where the pressures that New Zealand is experiencing externally, the supply constraint issues, and even here the Chief Executive has pointed out that in Singapore you can see the issues manifest physically at this port. And equally, of course, the war in Ukraine, it is having an impact. We are expecting that impact to be felt this quarter, and we are, of course, concerned about that.
Christopher Luxon suggests that you should get rid of Labour Day if you've got to make Matariki a public holiday. What do you make of that?
I do not believe that we need to get rid of another iconic public holiday in order for New Zealand to claim as our own our first child Māori public holiday in Matariki. In fact, we know, having just had Easter, that public holidays represent many things for New Zealanders. Time to be together, but also an opportunity for New Zealanders to engage in domestic tourism and hospitality, both of which will be welcome at this particular time. Thanks, everyone.
Be that it's called Labour.
Sorry. Well, I hope we're not. We're not getting rid of all national holidays, are we?
It's a slippery slope.
Touche.